I am Daniel Leakes, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He is the author of several books, no other than Mr. Richard Ayre.
Hiya, Daniel.
Great, Mr. Richard. How about you?
I'm fine, yes.
So, what book you want to discuss today?
Well, I thought we could talk about my novel, A Life Eternal.
Oh, sounds interesting. What does the book all about?
Right, well, the book it's a historical novel in a way, but it's a bit of a fantasy as well, and it takes place right across the 20th century. And it's the story of a young man who like so many other young men in 1914, joins up to go to fight in World War One. But in 1916, at the Battle of the Somme, he's shot and wounded, and he's dying. And so he ends up he ends up in a French church, just that they're using as a battlefield sort of hospital, if you like. And as he's dying in the middle of the night, and he's surrounded by all these young men who've been killed, this mysterious stranger appears by his bedside and touches him on the chest. And he says something to him that he can't remember later on. But the next morning he wakes up and he finds that his wounds are healing. And very quickly he's back to full strength. And that's where the story begins. And the story then, Rob, the young man, is called Rob Deacon. And he, over the course of the 20th century, over the next few years, he realizes that he has become immune to death. He cannot die. And he's not getting any older. And so the story, it's written, it's told sort of first person. And it follows the life of Rob from waking up in that hospital, that church bed in 1916, and it goes all the way through to 2022, following Rob's immortal life, if you like.
So, when you're writing this book, what inspired you the most?
I think what inspired me I wanted to write something about the 20th century, because the 20th century is it's seen the biggest changes in human life. I think, at the beginning of say 1900, the world was still Victorian, but you move very, very quickly through World War One and World War Two and the Cold War and the massive technological advances that happened in the 20th century. And so I wanted to write a story about an immortal, because it interests me, but I wanted it to almost be as if someone, possibly a human life expanse, if you like. I mean, he's like 126 or something by the end of the book, which obviously not many people get to, if anyone. But I didn't want it to be, like Highlander, where he's 500 years old. And that's basically what the whole story is, because I think if you were immortal, I think it would drive you mad. I think you would become inhuman. And this is the problem that Rob begins to suffer from. He begins to look upon other humans as less than him. And he's forever trying to keep his humanity throughout the book, while at the same time he's trying to find out why he's different, because he doesn't know who this person was that touched him and made him like this, and he doesn't understand why he's not like everybody else, and he wants to be. As the book goes on, he meets people, and he meets a woman that he loves, but he wants to be human, and he can't be the same as everybody else, and it starts to make him very, very angry throughout his life, really, and very sad and lonely. He's like a man he can never be close to anyone else. And that's what I wanted to write about. So I wanted to write a history novel, because there are things in there, such as World War One and World War Two, but there's things mentioned about the Cold War, events in the Cold War, like the Cuban Missile Crisis and things like that, that I wanted to sort of explore how that impacted on everybody's life, but certainly on somebody like Rob, who basically can't die. That's what the book is all about, really.
Why this book called Sci-Fi Chiller?
Yeah. It's not horror. It's not. I don't know what it is. It's speculative fiction, but it's about emotions. And I'd been writing horror stories, and I'd been writing sort of sci-fi stories, and I wanted to write something about human feelings. I wanted to write something a bit more literary, I think, and I think I did that with The Life Eternal. It's a quieter book, if you like, but there's a lot packed into it.
Okay, so is this your favorite book?
It is my favorite book. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. To me, I think this was my best writing. It seemed to flow very easily. The story for A Life Eternal seemed to come very quickly and very easily, and it seemed like it was the book I wanted to write. I hope that I can write more books. I mean, I've written books since that. I mean, we talked about Shadow of the Knife. I've written something slightly different, a more historical sort of thriller.
Yes.
But again, that's something I wanted to do. I wanted to do something. I like writing different genres. I don't want to be. I don't always want to write horror. I don't always want to write sci-fi or history. I write what I want to write.
Yes. If you are given a chance to have a movie contract, if you wanted the same title of the movie, or you wanted to modify?
I think the title is very good. We talked about this. The same thing happened with this as happened with Shadow of the Knife. I had a sort of a basic idea, but I had a title. Most of the time when I'm writing, the first thing that comes to me is the title of a book. And for this book, my original title was Passing It Along, which has a lot to do with it. It's how Rob gains this immortality. But the publishers, sort of rightly so, they sort of said it's not really generic enough. It's too generic, it doesn't really tell the story. But A Life Eternal obviously gives you an indication of what the story is about. It's about this guy's eternal life and how he starts to hate it. So I don't know. A Life Eternal, I think, is a good title. That would probably be what it was.
I think sounds interesting. What did you learn from this book?
I learned a lot about. But well, as I'm a history teacher, I do teach about the Cold War, so I sort of know the events of the 20th century quite well. But and I also teach about America in the 20th century, and I wanted to do some stuff in that as well. So there's a part of the book where Rob actually goes to New York, and he ends up. It's Prohibition, New York, with the and he ends up sort of working for a gangster, basically a mobster, and that was fun, sort of learning some of the mobsters, because we all know the ones in, everybody knows about Al Capone and Chicago and things in the 1920s, but finding out about the sort of gangster and the Prohibition and what was going on in New York was quite interesting, and stuff, people that I didn't know about, and that was interesting. So I learned about that. I learned that I quite like writing first person as well. I like because there's something about writing from a first person viewpoint which is difficult in a way, because you can't. There's a lot of my books, I've got little vignettes where things happen to one side, which are to do with the story, but they involve other people. But this one, obviously, if you're writing it as if I'm Rob writing my story and my life. I wanted to do that because it makes it more personal, and that's what I wanted for this book. I wanted it to be a very almost, for whoever was reading it could hopefully try and relate to it better than if it was third person. But I found that I quite like it. But it is difficult because you can't. It has to follow Rob's story, and that can get, if it's not done properly, I think it can get boring.
Yeah.
If you're talking about what you had for your dinner or something like that. If it's your ordinary life. But obviously his life is not ordinary. And so there's a lot of jumping around in time. Well, because it covers, from basically from 1916 up to, as I've said, up to 2022. So there are jumps and there are chunks where we don't know what happened to Rob. 10 years or so, where you pick the story up again. So that I learned how to write differently, I think, and I think it's worked. I think it's worked okay. I think it worked out all right.
Do A Life Eternal have a sequel?
No. It's a one-off, and I wouldn't want to. It, in a way, it could, with the way the ending is, I suppose. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted this story just to be a one-off. There's too many books that have sequels. I mean, not that this book has been particularly successful. It's been okay, but probably the most successful of all of my books. But I think, like films as well, they can just make one after the other, and it just spoils. Well, like Highlander, if we're talking about Immortals, Highlander is the movie Highlander. One of my favorite films ever. When it came out, I went to see it, and I loved it, and then they made that god awful sequel to it where they turned them all into spacemen, and I just and it spoils the original film. You've just got to basically. So I didn't want this spoiled. This is one man's story of his life, and you can't really write stories about different lives. It had to be about Rob.
It's all about Rob. How about if the movie outfit forced you to do it? Are you willing to do the sequel?
It would be really difficult to do it. I think I could do it. Well, no. I think I would have to put my foot down and say, no, this is just a one-off. I think what this book lends itself to, if we're talking, and if we're being talking fantasy and talking about films or stuff, I think what this, because it's in 3 parts, so it's like part 1, part 2, and part 3. So what would be? I suppose they could make 3 films if you could do that, but I think it would lend itself better to maybe it's a 3 series Netflix thing, with part 1, and then you could have the next series was part 2, and then the last series part 3. So it could be sequels if you chunk the book down into its different time periods, if you like, because part 1 is basically from World War One to about 1970, 69, 70, and then part 2 is from there till about 2015, and then the last part of the book is from 2015 to 2022. So the last part is very short time period wise, but there's a lot goes on.
Oh, sounds interesting, Mr. Richard. Eternal Life is all about Rob itself.
Yeah, about his life and how his strange life affects him.
So give us one highlight of the book.
One. I tell you, some people have written in the reviews.
Yes.
That the writing, because he ends up, obviously he's a young man in World War One, and so there are a few little flashbacks where he's thinking back to some events in World War One. But he ends up, I don't want to go into the book too much, but he does end up, even though he doesn't want to, he ends up in World War Two as well. And I think those his experiences are quite well written, or people have said they're well written. But I think a highlight would be, I think the highlight would be the end. I love the ending of this book, and I think it makes perfect sense of what he goes through for over 100 years. And I think the ending, I give him the ending he deserves in a way. And I think that would be the highlight. The highlight would be the finale, if you like. Adjectives would have to be what Rob feels about it. So you could have heartbroken. There's a lot of that in it. Lonely definitely would be a word to use. Questioning, I suppose, because he's forever trying to find out why he is the way he is. Anger, he becomes very closed off and angry. And redemption will be good at the end of the book. So they would be the words I'd use, I think.
Sounds interesting, Mr. Richard. As a writer of different kinds of genre,
Yeah.
if you're writing a fiction, what inspired you the most?
I think it starts with a question, a sort of what if? That's what's always inspired. I think it's what inspires most writers, but certainly with me, it starts with a question. Well, what if you were immortal? What would the reality of being immortal, not being able to die, what would that really mean? Because most people think, oh, it'd be brilliant. You could do what you want, and you could do all these exciting things, and if you wouldn't get killed and you wouldn't die. But the what if was, well, what if it's not like that? What if the reality is real horror? Because you haven't got that certainty at the end that you will die, because it's the one thing, dying, it sounds a bit macabre in a way, but dying is the one thing that every single human being has a connection with each other, because we're all going to die at some point. Everyone is going to die, and there's a bit in the book where he says it doesn't matter who you are or what you've had in your life, at the end you're on your own, and I think that sort of that what if you couldn't die, how would that be a good thing or a bad thing? And as I was sort of looking into the book and writing, and I thought it would be I think it would be a bad thing. I think it'd be an awful thing, because you can't be the same as everybody else. You're totally different.
Yes.
And I think the what if is just for every book. Every book I've ever written. Shadow of the Knife that we've talked about previously, me and you. Well, what if those murders started again? 2 years after Jack the Ripper, and with Point of Contact. What if people started to die? In bizarre manner, what would happen? And so it's always a what if. That's what always is the first thing with my writing. What if this happens? What would you do then? And then you just take it from there and sort of run with it,
Yes. So is it the same with horror? If you're writing a horror?
Yeah, absolutely. With Minstrel's Bargain, my first ever book, what if there was this immortal, again, we're talking about immortality, except Minstrel likes being immortal, but what if there is this ancient creature who uses music to steal souls? And basically that's what Minstrel's Bargain and the two sequels of Minstrel's Bargain, the prophecy books, are all about. What if you had this creature who hides behind a human face, and that's basically where everything comes from.
So what genre do you like writing?
It changes. I think if there's anything that I would say, that's speculative genre. So whether that's sci-fi or whether it's something like A Life Eternal, I still don't even know really what genre A Life Eternal is. I suppose on one aspect it is science fiction, but it's also a sort of more literary type of novel. But I love, there's books I would love to write. I'd love to write a children's book, and I've tried, but I'm not very good at it. And I think I would have to practice at that to do it justice, But it does change. I've got a lot of ideas for books that I've written down ideas, and some of them are like alternative histories. Do you know what I mean? So if again, they're the perfect what if something had happened and changes history, So I've got a couple of ideas for that, but I've also got a horror idea and another sort of speculative idea as well. I've got a lot of them. It's just getting the time to get them all written down, you know. And at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm trying to write. At the moment, I'm still trying to write the sequel to Shadow of the Knife, which was the last book that I wrote.
Interesting. So if you compare A Life Eternal to Shadow of the Knife, what is the big difference?
The big difference, I suppose, is the Shadow of the Knife is it's a mystery thriller. There's a big element of mystery in A Life Eternal as well. When he just for him trying to find out why Rob is immortal, why he is the way he is. But the big difference is, I think, that speculative side. You know, Shadow of the Knife is it's set in the past, but it is. I try to make it as realistic as possible. With a book like A Life Eternal, I've got a sort of a get out clause in a way that Rob can't be killed. So if he ends up, you know, getting shot or something, then he's not going to die. But in obviously a Shadow of the Knife, then people would die if they were shot. And that's the big difference, I suppose, is just the tone. The tone of the two books are very different. Shadow of the Knife is much more fast-paced thriller, even though it's set in the past, and it's sort of a police type thriller. Whereas A Life Eternal is a in a way, although there's a lot of action sequence in there. In a way, it's a quieter book. It's a more contemplative book. You know, thinking about things rather than you know, running around the streets of the East End trying to catch a killer.
So, Mr. Richard, if you will make a fusion in writing, if you want to combine Life Eternal and Shadow of the Knife, what part of the book will make a fusion?
I think what I try to do in all of my books, and I try to do this with Minstrel's Bargain, the first book I had published, I try to make my characters as human as possible. And I think that would be the connection, because I've read a lot of books where you've got these cardboard character, two-dimensional type characters who just get on and do stuff. But I personally, as a reader, I like getting to know the why, you know, the why a character does a certain thing or how a character feels. And I suppose maybe a lot of people don't like that, but that's personally that I think goes across all of my books. Other people might disagree, but I think my characters are human. You can relate to them. Certainly, you know, like I say with minstrels, certainly with Rob, but Rob is a strange fish because he becomes so removed from humanity in a way, you know. And he's from a different period of time. You know, he's born in 1896, so he's not, you know, he's not a character that I can relate to from my lifetime, if you like. I suppose the main character in Minstrel's Bargain, Phil Sturgis, is much more like me, and I think I wrote him very similar to my personality, if you like. But I've tried to not do that in books since I've written. I don't want to put too much of me onto the pages, you know.
So, are you writing right now again another novel?
Yeah, well, I have been again. I've been recently picking up writing a sequel to Shadow of the Knife. So I'd like at least one more book with Jarman and Jonas Handy, the two main characters from that book. I like them. So that's another sort of historical mystery. So that's what I'm working on at the minute. But I have got ideas. I have dreams, you know. I have weird dreams, and I write them down. And I think, oh well, that's got the kernel of something that I can use as a story, you know. So I've got a sort of sheet of paper with all these different ideas of stories, and my plan is when I can get to them, I'll get onto one and I'll finish it and I'll move on to the other. You know, and more ideas will hopefully come.
Well, good luck for that sequel
Thank
of
you.
Shadow of the Knife, Mr.
Thank you.
Richards. So where do people buy your books?
Well, again, Amazon, I suppose, is the main one. But any you can buy the paperback anywhere. You can buy a paperback. Waterstones in the UK. I don't. Do you have Waterstones in Canada?
No, Mr.
No,
Richard.
Waterstones. It must
Amazon.
be
Yes, Amazon. We have Amazon.ca.
Amazon. Yeah. But anywhere you can buy a paperback. I mean, there's and I'm sure there's Canadian outlets that I don't know about, but I would imagine Amazon would be the first port of call. But again, for this particular book, you can buy it from burningchair.com. They've got their own little sort of shop on there that you can buy the paperback from. But if you're wanting the Kindle edition, it has to be Amazon because it is on KDP, so it's only on Amazon for the electronic version. But you can get the paperback in virtually anywhere where you buy paperbacks.
Please support Mr. Richard Ayre and
Yes, please do.
buy all the books.
Well, we can do if you want to. I mean, I don't know if people will get bored.
No.
I suppose we could, if you wanted to talk about the prophecy books, there are 3 books, so you've got 3 books to talk about with that one. You can do that all in one go, I suppose. If you
Sounds interesting. We're gonna talk about that one next week, Mr. Richard.
Okay. All right. Brilliant.
Thank you for having you, Mr. Richard.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Can I just give a little call out to some various people that have, writers and things that have helped me and I've become friends with? Is that all right to do?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, go ahead.
Cheers. Can I just say a massive thank you to the following people: Steve Griffiths, Faith Phillips, Andrew Neil McLeod, John Fullerton, Patricia Ayling, James Marks, Richard Wall, David Owen Hughes, Chris Tetrol Blair, Adrian Chamberlain, Anita Waller, Duncan Bradshaw, Shane Agnew, Chris Hall, Trish Finnegan, and Nikki Baker. And I'm sure I've missed people off, and if I have, massive apologies. And if I get the chance to talk to you again, Daniel, I'll add those people in. But it's amazing. The best thing, you know what it is? The best thing about being a writer is meeting other writers and meeting other people who are, and it's just lovely because you become friends with these people. And most of these people I've never met face to face. They've, in fact, there's only 4 people I've met face to face. But they've all become friends, and we support each other. And that's what's really brilliant about being a writer is the support you get off other writers.
I created this podcast to empower writers like you.
Yeah, exactly. And people like yourself are just wonderful as well, Daniel. It's every writer appreciates everything anybody ever does. But it makes for a nice family, I think.
Yes, that's true. Thank you for empowering writers like Mr. Richard. Thank you so much, Mr. Richard.
Thank you again, Daniel. Lovely to speak to you.
Shout out to the people listening in the United States. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast. More to come, people. See you soon.
Bye, Daniel. Bye.